Ashir wants to know, is it worth shelling out for expensive cables and housing or even anything but the middle of the road stuff, especially if I replace mine every few months or so? Great question, Ashir. Changing cables and housing is a relatively inexpensive way to make sure that your bike is shifting and braking to its highest potential. There are lots of different options out there when it comes to both the cables and housing you choose to use, so we'll take a look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of those options. Let's start with the cables. The difference between inexpensive cables and more expensive cables is the coating applied to the cable itself. The most basic cables will be non-coated steel cables, and the more expensive ones will typically be a stainless steel cable with a Teflon coating of some sort. Non-coated steel cables are susceptible to rust, so I stay away from those whenever possible. The types of cables I prefer to use the most are the non-coated stainless steel variety. They are resistant to rust and slide almost as well as the coated cables. I tend to avoid the coated cables simply because I've had problems with the coating eventually breaking down and separating from the cable no matter which brand you buy. When this goes unnoticed, it creates excessive drag in the housing. Also, the coating is very thin, so you have to be extra careful when running these cables on your bike and getting them set up, especially with all the internal cable routing we're seeing on frames these days. However, it should be noted that when installed with care and done properly, coated cables do provide a lighter action at the shifter, which translates into better, more precise shifting and braking. Let's move on to the housing. All shift housing is compressionless and has some form of lubrication within the plastic liner running down the center of the housing. More expensive housing is the alloy link style that consists of a series of small alloy bits that bend and move together with a plastic liner running down the center, as opposed to the traditional shift housing, which consists of a bunch of small wires running parallel to your cable that are sandwiched between the inner plastic liner and the outer casing. If your bike's cable routing requires a tight bend, I would recommend going with either Jaguar Elite Road Link systems or the no-con cable and housing sets. Otherwise, the traditional style housing will work just fine, and since there is very minimal difference between brands, go with what's available. And when it comes to brake housing, you have a few options there as well. There's a traditional helical wound brake housing as well as compressionless housing. If you choose to use compressionless housing, you have to make sure it's specific to brakes. Compressionless brake housing is typically reinforced with Kevlar to be able to withstand the forces exerted during braking. Compressionless brake housing is also much stiffer than the helical housing, so the setup process needs to be much more precise. Even though I said I avoid them, coated cables do provide a better feel when it comes to both shifting and braking. So if you stay on top of your bike maintenance and can afford the extra cost, I say get the coated cables and reward yourself with more precise shifting and braking. When it comes to the housing, just stick with the traditional stuff and save a little money so you can afford those nicer cables. If you want your question asked on Ask a Mechanic presented by Cyclery, send your inquiry to webletters@competitorgroup.com.